This is John Karp from the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My debut album is now available on all major streaming platforms and can be downloaded on iTunes and Amazon.com. Go to johncarp.com for more details. That's JONCARP.com. Thank you.
Don't forget about me.
What's going on, everybody? You're tuned in to the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Let's get right into this book. This episode, we're going to do laws 31 and 32. First, law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal. The judgment is, the best deceptions are the ones that seem to give the other person a choice. Your victims feel they are in control, but are actually your puppets. Give people options that come out in your favor, whichever one they choose. Force them to make choices between the lesser of two evils, both of which serve your purpose. Put them on the horns of a dilemma. They are gored wherever they turn.
Okay, so according to Robert Greene, there are several common ways to control the options, and the whole idea is to give the illusion that that the choice is being made by the individual making the choice, but really you're setting up the choices to benefit you.
Absolutely.
And there's several ways you can do that, but the first I'm going to I'm going to go over the observance, because it's a great illustration of this law at work that Robert Greene gives, and it's about Ivan the Fourth. For those of you who know your history, you know that's Ivan the Terrible.
Terrible.
And we're about to find out how he got his nickname, or what led to him getting his nickname, rather. So anyway, Ivan the Fourth had a contentious relationship with the Boyars, who were basically like the courtesans of the Russian court, right?
The women?
Not courtesans, I'm sorry. They were just members of the Russian court.
The courtiers, I guess.
Yeah, not courtesans, courtiers. Thank you. I got the terms mixed up. Anyway, so like even from little kid on, like, you know, these Boyars were responsible for the murders of several of the royal members of Ivan's family and stuff like that. Like really brutal stuff. Mm-hmm. However, you know, a lot of these Boyars stuck around, but some of them started to defect to Russia's greater enemy, which was Poland and Lithuania. Mm-hmm. There was a time where Poland and Lithuania were one country. For anyone who's like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah.
So anyway, and one of Ivan's closest friends was Prince Andrei Kurbsky, and he ended up defecting to Poland and Lithuania too. Not only did he defect to Poland and Lithuania, he actually rose up an army to invade Russia. Russia was not as big as it is nowadays. It stretched as far east as the Ural Mountains. Okay. If you don't know where that is, just pick up a globe, people.
Yeah, look it up.
Look it up. Come on,
Google.
guys. Anyway, but not only was Russia having trouble with this army coming in from Poland and Lithuania, as I mentioned, there were still some Boyars left over. They were causing some internal strife. And not just that, but there were the Tartars from the east.
I love their sauce. Yeah, sorry.
The Tartars from the east were invading as well. Mm-hmm. All right. So, as you can probably see, Ivan was in he was in a big pickle, we'll say.
Yeah.
So he decided, all right, that's it. I'm packing up my stuff. I'm going to this random ass village south of Moscow, and so he loaded up all his stuff on sleds and he booked out of Moscow. And he waited about a month until he sent a letter to the Russian people explaining why he left, because he didn't really give a rhyme or reason why he was leaving. He just left.
Yeah.
And he basically detailed in his letter how he couldn't stand the treacherous Boyars anymore, basically.
Just aired them out in front of everybody.
Basically, yeah. And this led to complete chaos, particularly among the merchants and the just the commoners. They took to the streets, and there was riots and just complete and utter chaos. It was descending into anarchy, and pretty soon civil war.
Mm-hmm.
So there were princes and others in the nobility, as well as in the Eastern Orthodox Church, that got together and said, listen, we got to get this Ivan guy back because this is just chaos.
Yeah.
So they went to this village and they said, all right, Ivan, we really need you to come back, dude.
Yeah.
This is like,
Do us a solid.
Yeah, please come back. And Ivan's like, all right, I'll come back, but only under the condition that I'm given absolute power and that I can use it however I see fit.
Yeah.
And these delegates were so desperate at this point that they just said, absolutely, sounds great.
Definitely.
So when Ivan came back, that's when he started his reign of terror, which is acquired a degree of infamy, as he would send basically secret police around to kill anyone who's suspected of being against Ivan and his rule. And that included people that probably had nothing to do with it, but paranoia kind of swept across Russia.
Okay.
At that time.
Those it's, I don't know, that story kind of best illustrates everything in this chapter, where essentially Ivan had limited power. He couldn't really do a lot because he had, he was kind of on both sides. He had people kind of watching him. The boyars had their own interests at heart, and he couldn't just do anything he could to the people. But he wanted absolute power, and so the way to do it was to give them two options, to kind of say, you guys fend for yourselves. I'm going to be here by myself. I'm going to be here kind of isolated, or I have all the power. That means I can, I have control over the boyars and the entire populace. And so, he set it up in a way where, they were really, if the people made that decision and said, hey, Ivan, we're going to relinquish all the power to you. Anything that happened after that, from the people's vantage point, was really their fault because they're the ones that made that decision. It wasn't something that was forced on them, which is another kind of powerful, another powerful part of this law, which is that you kind of, by giving people a choice, even though you kind of you're framing the choice to your advantage, the people feel like they have the freedom, and they pick something, and really it's essentially part of it is their fault because they made that decision to begin with. So if the plan does go haywire on their, from their vantage point, it's kind of their fault too, in a way.
Right. Well, that's kind of getting into the common ways that you can control the options. And Robert Greene gives, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. The first one he gives is something called color of choices. So basically, present the choices in such a way that the one you prefer to be chosen will be seen by the other as being the best choice. I actually use this one all the time when I teach.
Yeah.
Basically, the one school that I work at sometimes, they have this policy that if a kid basically acts way out of line, you can send them to the administrator and they'll have to come to school on Saturday.
No.
So
Okay.
I always open up every class with, here's your assignment. Let's lay down this very quick ground rule. I'm very well aware of the discipline procedures here at the school.
Yeah.
And because this is like middle school, I'm like, you're at an age now, the difference between good behavior and bad behavior. So if you choose to behave inappropriately, I will send you down to the administrator and you will be here on Saturday.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, so choice is yours. You can either behave yourself and have Saturday off, or you can misbehave and we'll see you here on Saturday.
Wow. Is it effective?
Oh, very effective. Very effective.
Yeah.
Because what kid wants to spend Saturday at school?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's very effective.
that is true. That is true. Yeah, no,
You
I
know?
think um this I guess what this way of setting up choices, the color the choices is effective. I know the green says essentially works on people who are very insecure, I guess, who are very kind of um, yeah. So really, if you're in a position where you're working under someone who's kind of insecure, it's a good way of making it seem as if these things like it was the person's idea to go this direction, when really you're framing it in a certain way where it works to your benefit, right? So the same way Kissinger did with Richard Nixon, I guess, was the example. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he was basically, Kissinger would basically lay out various options that Nixon could choose from regarding this policy or that, and he would go, well, you could choose this option. This will lead to this and that.
Yeah.
Or you can choose this option, and this benefit and that benefit will come from it.
Yeah.
And that's all he needed to do. And
exactly.
basically gave Nixon would obviously go for the choice that had the most benefits.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which was the choice that Kissinger wanted all along.
Exactly. If Kissinger had come out and said, hey, let's do A, B, C, and D, that might have offended Nixon's, vanity, I guess, or his ego or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would have, who knows? He could have said, no, I don't want to do it that way, just because he was hurt in some way. So this is kind of an effective way to.
It definitely would have hurt Nixon's vanity. He was a notoriously vain person.
Absolutely.
So.
Definitely.
And then here's another one, which I thought was an interesting one. I never thought of this angle, force the resistor. So this is for those who enjoy basically doing the opposite of what you ask them to. So what you do is you advocate for the opposite of what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And they'll choose to do they'll choose to do the opposite because they want to basically rebel against you. But little do they know that in choosing the opposite of what you want them to, that you supposedly want them to choose, they'll end up doing what you want them to.
Little thing called reverse psychology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Green says this definitely works, I guess, with children. Like, let's say if you're a disciplinarian, I guess in your case too, this could be a good way to kind of discipline maybe some of your students as well.
I'm trying. After I read that, I'm like, I wonder how I can use this.
Yeah, because who knows? Maybe by you saying, "Hey, kids, if you guys choose to like misbehave, then you're gonna come back on Saturday." I was kind of thinking, I'm sure there might have been a few kids who said, "All right," who tried to call your bluff, I guess,
right,
and misbehaved, and then
that happens.
Does it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that happens in other instances. Not at that school, but other instances it does.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just make an example of them.
There you go.
That's all you do. I do that all the time. A kid wants to challenge me. Like, all right, see you later. Write them a referral. They're gone.
Oh, snap.
And I'll go, anyone else?
Yeah.
Nothing. No, if you're going to make that's the number one thing with kids. If you're going to make a rule, you got to stick with it.
You have to stick with it. Yeah, you can't be wishy-washy.
That's right.
Definitely.
But anyway, you were saying about forcing a resistor.
Yeah, no. It's the main thing is it's reverse psychology. You make you kind of frame the decisions in a way where you act like you give the person some options, right? But then the option that you want them to take, you pretend that you don't really want. You know what I mean? You're not really for that option. You kind of frame the other two ways, and you say, oh, you could do this, do that, or you don't really want to do this, but you could do that. And then the person picks up on that and goes, oh, they don't want me to do that for whatever reason. Maybe they attribute it to you, maybe gaining some benefit if they don't do that, and then they do it, and then boom.
Yeah.
You're all the wiser for it.
Yeah, I wish I could think of an example for this, but I don't know of any.
Yeah, I don't have any off the top of my head either.
Yeah.
I know I've used it before.
Huh? You've used it?
I mean, as a kid and stuff, I have a bunch of brothers and sisters, I'm sure I've, kind of, used it before.
I don't know. Oh, well, it's
Got
an
nothing right
interesting
now.
one. Then there's alter the playing field. So basically, you change the conditions so that your option is the only viable option.
Absolutely.
You know, a lot of people in power do this.
Yeah.
You know, you could definitely say that. Well, Rockefeller did this actually.
John D.
Rockefeller, yeah.
Absolutely.
Robert Greene mentioned him in the book, but he didn't quite mention to the extent that John D. Rockefeller would pull this tactic. It was true that he basically was able to corner the railroad so that to transport his oil, and that basically put a lot of oil companies out of business, or he was able to absorb them just for the mere fact that, you know, he controlled the railroad lines, so
Yeah.
these other oil companies couldn't possibly ship out their oil anyway without charging an even higher price than what John D. Rockefeller, or without paying a higher price than what John D. Rockefeller had to.
Yeah.
But there's another thing too. There was a, what had happened was there was this competing railroad company that was competing against Vanderbilt, who had basically bought up a bunch of these railroad companies, and that's basically how Rockefeller got started. Was basically using the railroad lines through Vanderbilt, and because Rockefeller basically ended up becoming a monopoly, you know, Vanderbilt's railroad line wasn't profitable unless it was transporting Rockefeller's oil.
There you go. Yeah.
So, but there was this other competing railroad line who, a guy's name I can't remember, but his protege was Carnegie. But I can't remember the gentleman's name. But in any case, he was not pleased about, you know, having to pay these high prices to be able to transport standard oil.
Yeah.
Right. And so he so what he started doing was building more railroad lines to link up with other oil companies or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So
And this was Andrew or Dale Carnegie?
it wasn't either Carnegie.
Oh,
it was just the guy that Carnegie was a protege under.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
And this pissed off Rockefeller,
Yeah.
right? And the guy who owned this railroad was like, "Well, you can cry all you want, but as far as I know, there's no other railroad that runs from Pittsburgh to New York. So
Yeah.
you're kind of screwed, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And so Rockefeller was like, "All right, I'll raise you." So what he did is he built a pipeline that went from I can't remember where it was. Oh, I think it went from his oil refineries in eastern Ohio to I want to say it was Erie, Pennsylvania or something, so that he
Oh.
could put that oil onto ships and have them sail around St. Lawrence.
Wow.
Didn't do that. Or
Good
something like
Lord.
that. He set up an oil pipeline
Yeah.
to transport the oil that way. And
Need a lot of money for that.
yeah. But he did it though.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that anybody ever piped in oil.
Yeah.
Like nobody had ever thought of doing that,
Wow.
you know. So there you go, change the playing field.
Absolutely.
He did that twice.
Yeah.
Um,
Altering the playing field. Yeah. I think that's a very effective tool to use, but again, it's it's very interesting when you're looking at all these tactics and all these laws in general of thinking ahead and being very kind of being in control of your emotions and things like that. I think in order to alter the playing field well is you have to really exercise you have to really be forward thinking and exercise every and kind of be aware of every opportunity that may come, you know. So I think that's why this tactic I think is probably the hardest to pull off when you're trying to.
it takes time.
Yeah,
It takes a lot of time.
A lot of time and a lot of effort.
Unless you can. I mean, the only thing that wouldn't take time is if like you're in a battle situation. If you can get to high ground first
Okay. Yeah.
and force the enemy to charge uphill,
Yeah. Yeah.
then, you know. But if you're the enemy, then just retreat and go to high ground,
Mm-hmm.
like what Sun Tzu says.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That so many people don't follow.
Yeah,
Talking to you, General Pickett.
I know you're listening.
From beyond the grave.
Absolutely.
I'm referring to Pickett's charge in case anyone is wondering what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It'll make your head spin.
Google.
Yeah, Google.
Yeah.
It'll make your head spin. Like, why did you do that? That was really stupid. Basically, just sent all these Confederates up this hill, and they were all mowed down by the Union. And everyone was like, "Well, that was dumb."
Yeah.
Lost his entire regiment like that.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
The shrinking option. Make your preferred option time sensitive and subject to depletion or price hike. Give your target the feeling to act with urgency and to not hesitate. We see this all the time, especially on TV when they're like, "Get this diamond ring for
infomercials." And,
or there's like shopping. You know what I'm talking about? The shopping channels.
Yeah. Something GTV.
They're every. There's a bunch of them.
QVC is like that.
I think so. Yeah, QVC.
Where they say, if you call like within the next 20 minutes, we're gonna have this and we're gonna add this thing too and this other thing. They keep adding stuff,
and most of it's complete garbage.
Yeah.
Like,
and there's a little timer there when you know that this commercial isn't really time sensitive at all.
Yeah, it's not like real diamonds or whatever. Yeah.
But this tactic, like Green says, it's kind of used for people who are very indecisive, and so you can kind of put you can kind of put the pressure on them by making the thing very time sensitive. I think the example that he had was of a painter who had a bunch of paintings and things like that, and he would show it to people, and the people would come by and they would see these beautiful paintings, and then if they didn't buy anything that day, they'd come back the next day and he'd have paintings of I guess lower quality, and then people would come by and see that, and in the back of their head they'd be thinking, where are those beautiful paintings from yesterday? They'd come back the next day and he'd have even lower quality, and he could just keep doing that. And so that put the pressure on the person observing it to be like, oh, I have to get something now or else it's going to go away. So it's a good way to kind of put the pressure on people who are more, I guess they can make up their mind. They're very indecisive.
Yeah, absolutely. The weak man on the precipice. So this is kind of similar to coloring the choices, except this tactic uses fear as an influence to basically get your target to choose your preferred option. This is definitely something that Adolf Hitler used in his rise to power. Basically kind of appealing to the German fears and anxieties about the economy crashing, them losing their place in the world, and yada, yada, yada. And just tapping into that and showing that, well, if you guys go with me on my crazy ass escapade, we can return Germany to its former glory.
Absolutely.
But that's the thing, is you're tapping into people's fears.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a common tactic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's used in the Russian Revolution and so many other things. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's been used. It's been used time and time again. I guess just because how big of a factor fear can be, and how so many people, just how raw of an emotion I guess that is. That's
it's very potent.
Yeah, it's very potent.
Yeah.
But again, very similar to the color your choices tactic, but just a little more extreme.
Yeah. It's using more of a fear. Yeah, kind of thing. Brothers in crime. Attract your victim to a crime scheme wherein you share in the blood and guilt. This way, if you go down, they go down, thus encouraging them to not only remain silent of the enterprise, but to do your bidding, lest they suffer the consequences. It's like such a common TV plot.
Yeah.
It really is.
There's so many. I don't know. All of these tactics where and Green talks about it a few times in this book about like kind of con con artist games and things like that. I don't know. For me, I always kind of lose a sense of proportion, or I can't really. It's hard for me to envision kind of modern examples of that. You know what I mean? I know people get conned all the time, but like even a tactic like this, I can't really think of anything. I don't know, anything kind of modern. Any modern examples of something like this happening nowadays? I don't know.
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know they happen all the time. I mean, there's a reason why it's a common TV trope.
Yeah.
You know, it does happen all the time. I mean, you know, it's one of those things. I don't know why I'm blanking on this one because I should be able to come up with something right now.
Yeah.
But needless to say, it is very common.
Definitely.
Particularly in like crime circles.
Okay.
You know, so like mafias and drug dealers. And
okay.
That sort of thing.
Maybe it's because I'm such a, maybe it's because I'm so, I'm so steeped in non-crime that I can't think of it. I don't know.
I'm not a criminal either. I just
I'm not street smart enough. I think that's what it is.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay.
I haven't lived in the big city.
Right. Okay. All right. I mean, yeah, okay. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it. The horns of a dilemma lead the victim to choose between two options, each of which is damaging to them. They will be forced to surrender.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that this was the tactic I was thinking about. I think we're speaking right before we start recording here, but this is essentially the kind of thing where I believe that like a trial lawyer would use on someone. I think that's what Green talks about as he's explaining it. But you're essentially giving the person two options to hang themselves with. You know what I mean? So like you present both options, and the person hears them, and they pick one, and either one of them is gonna make them look bad. It's I guess the same way. And John, you might actually speak a little more at length of this, but whenever you look at in terms of politics and the kind of two-party system that we do have, right, where we kind of see a choice between two people who can represent us, but that's all we have is we just have those two people. When in reality, it could be a thing where there's maybe greater forces, I guess, in power here who just give us this choice, but both of those choices kind of achieve their end, and so it's really not benefiting us, not as much as we think they are. In a way, they're both going to achieve something, maybe even to our detriment. You know what I mean? But we look at it and we have a choice of two people, and since we're picking one, we feel like we're making a difference. When in general, these two people are just being thrown out there to, I guess, to blind us into just making a choice that will, I guess, hang ourselves on or whatever.
Well, it's a theory that's probably been circulating more and more in recent times. It's that, are the Republicans and Democrats really that different?
Yeah.
Or is it just a big show to give the impression that the American public is choosing between two options?
Yeah. And
there's definitely some compelling arguments for that theory. I mean, if you look at Wall Street, the very it's not like anything really has changed really in the way that Wall Street is regulated. It's still not really all that well regulated. Mm-hmm. And it was during Bush's term that these banks were bailed out, and the promise was that that the owners of these big banks would be held accountable for basically nearly destroying the economy here.
No.
But that never happened. And that was a campaign promise by Obama. And not only did that not happen, but a lot of the advisors to these banks were hired by Obama on his administration. Not to throw Obama under the bus, but it did happen. And I'm not making it up. You can look this up on your own.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, well, What did we vote for? I thought we
Yeah.
voted for change, right?
Yeah.
Clearly not. On some things, some changes did happen. Like, there was increased rights for gays and stuff like that, and obviously the healthcare thing, which really wasn't that different than what Mitt Romney's plan was, really. So, anyway, but the point is that, the question is, are these two parties really working that different? I think the most notable example was before the existence of the Federal Elections Committee, which is a committee that puts on these televised debates. These televised debates were run by the League of Women Voters, and basically anybody who had a significant following could get on national televised debates. And that's what happened in the 1992 election between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and Ross Perot. Ross Perot was an independent candidate who garnered quite a following, and he was invited to go on the televised debates and got more support because of it. And as a result, he got 18% of the vote, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
Especially for a third party. And ran again 4 years later, and didn't do as well, but still managed to get a sizable amount of votes. At this point that the Federal Elections Committee was created, and the League of Women Voters was booted out, and now they run the debates, and the members of the Federal Elections Committee are high-ranking Republicans and Democrats.
It's bipartisan.
Yeah, it's bipartisan in that way. We saw this most strikingly when Gary Johnson was running first in 2012. The threshold was, well, if you get 5% in the polls, we'll let you on the debate. Well, he didn't get that time around. But in 2016, when he ran again, he surpassed that. But the Federal Elections Committee had changed their arbitrary setting to 15%, which he didn't get. But he was at 10 or 11. Which would have qualified him 4 years prior. So it's not like, so there's definitely some, let me put it this way, it might be a bit of a conspiracy theory to say that the Republicans and Democrats are hand in hand and whatever. But there's definitely some compelling evidence for it, and I would also say that at the very least you can definitely say that they're working together to keep any third party out, for sure.
And I mean it on a large scale, on like a macro scale, it kind of makes sense. I see why I guess someone would do that. When you think about it, this two-party system is very cyclical. Over the past 100 years or whatever, it swings back and forth, kind of like a pendulum. 8 years we'll have a Democrat, another 8 we'll have a Republican in there. So it kind of swings back and forth. And when you have a large group of people who make the decision, so to them it seems like they have the power, it kind of leads them to, I guess, be less suspicious than someone of like a group of people saying, it's less suspicious than if a group of people were like, hey, we want you guys to, be ruled by this person. The people will be hysteria. The people will get mad. They'll want to overthrow whoever's in charge and say, hey, we want to be in power. So by making people think that the power is actually in their hands, like it's a way to calm them while the true puppet masters really run everything, I guess. If we're talking conspiracy theory land and everything. I mean, such is the case with a representative democracy. Direct democracy, obviously the people choose what's what. In a representative democracy, now you're choosing someone to be your spokesperson. Things can get really muddled and corrupt. That's absolutely.
But you can't expect people to directly vote on everything. It's just, good God, we're having a hard enough time just getting people to go out to vote. As it is. Can you imagine if they had to vote on every single issue?
That would be nuts.
It wouldn't happen. It'd be insane. So
But again, power is always it's all about appearances. It's about how things appear, and you know, if you can make it seem like the people have the power, then I mean, you know, that's all they see.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And then finally, well, that's the end of it. But the one thing that I wanted to say was, if you know, if you're clearly the agent of punishment on someone you're trying to deceive through all these various tactics, right? Expect a counterattack, right? But if the individual who's making these choices sees themselves as the agent of their own punishment, then they'll submit to their misfortune quietly. So if so, like in the case of Ivan, if nobody revolted against Ivan because they kind of saw themselves as being responsible for putting him into power, right? They ceded their power in the name of certainty and security.
Yeah.
But once you do that, and now you have this guy who basically goes off the rail and starts having this reign of bloodshed, well, you put him in power.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
it's kind of on you now.
So the responsibility is on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily on that other person because you made that choice. So even though the person who framed those choices to you had their ideas, you don't see that. You just see the choice that you made. Because when you made that decision, you thought that you had the power to make it, you know?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I guess we could switch over to the reversal.
Let's do it, yeah.
So the reversal talks mostly about how this law mostly works when you're a person who kind of has, you're a little bit weaker. You don't necessarily have a great deal of power. And so you need to make decisions, but at the same time, you also don't want to be have people suspiciously look at you and things like that. But you'd still need to make a somewhat of a bold decision. So the way for you to do it is to make these decisions by framing options to other people, the people who are in power, to make those decisions. So you know, if you're someone who already has the power, you know, this isn't necessarily a law that you use a lot. It'll be something that you use sparingly, if not at all. But at the same time, too, a limitation to this law is sometimes it actually works for you to not necessarily frame options for other people, but to let other people do what they do, and then for you to just stand back and to observe them. A lot about I think Green has kind of shown us through this book that a lot, I guess, power, a lot of it comes from just observing other people, seeing how they react, and then letting them react the way they react, and just letting them be them in a way, and it furthering your power in that same way by you not really injecting your will onto them, just you kind of letting them do what they do. And so by you making them kind of, you know, make a choice, making them kind of act on your behalf, you're in a way limiting yourself. So it's one of the reversals of this law is for you to just, you know, take a step back and observe other people and spy on them and see what they do, and then try to find a way to use that to your benefit.
Right. Well, this whole law, I think, you know, I think it can be used in a good way, but there are some things that I don't think could. Like, I don't really see how brothers in crime could be used at a positive light, and I don't see how what was it? The weak man on the precipice using fear to get people to choose what you want.
No,
it could be used in a moralistic way. But I think other these things could, and they're often used in business all the time. So, you know, there's that. But, you know, we talk about this a lot. It's good to at least be aware of certainly all of these, at least for a defense mechanism, so that, you know, you're not, especially like with something like the shrinking option, you're not just, you know, buying something because you're afraid it's not going to be there. I mean, I think that's something that everybody needs to be certainly aware of.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
But just other things too, you know, whenever someone starts, you know, categorizing a group of people as being the cause of all your problems and trying to build up all this fear, be really suspicious of that, you know. So if nothing else, I definitely recommend this law as a defense mechanism. You might use some aspects of it in a moralistic way, but I'd say in that case it's more like 25-75. Really, most of it's not it's not really moral, but know it so that you can defend yourself.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think one thing, I mean, for me, I also don't think that this is a law that I would encourage people to just go out and do consistently, unless it's something that you're using in defense of other people. Now, I think one of the main points of this book is that there's, the world isn't sunshine and rainbows. There are people out there who are trying to take advantage of you, and power, again, is quote unquote power is all about appearances. So I think it helps also to always kind of second guess situations where you're given kind of options. Try to see what's behind them. Try to see what the person saying is after, and just try to second guess it. Think it through clearly, and just try to see what's behind behind what they're saying, and weigh your options kind of in a clear-headed way. I think it's very important to do that.
I think it's a perfect way to segue into this next law, actually.
Absolutely. Let's get right into it. Law number 32, and that's play to people's fantasies. The judgment is the truth is often avoided because it is ugly and unpleasant. Never appeal to truth and reality unless you are prepared for the anger that comes from disenchantment. Life is so harsh and distressing that people who can manufacture romance or conjure up fantasy are like oases in the desert. Everyone flocks to them. There's great power in tapping into the fantasies of the masses.
Right. I think that segue was perfect, and we didn't even plan that.
Absolutely. This happened organically.
Yeah. So the observance of this law that Robert Greene gives is about Venice. So Venice used to be the Venetian Republic, right? Used to be this economic powerhouse, right? They were one of the few European powers actually that traded with the Ottoman Empire, so they had quite a lot of wealth. But when Columbus discovered the Americas, all of a sudden this global sphere of influence shifted to the Atlantic side countries like Spain, Portugal, and eventually Britain. And so Venice was losing out on all this economic activity because they were stuck in the Mediterranean basin, right? So while the Venetians were kind of hemming and hawing about their glory days, they were also trying to bring back this wealth to their country. And this inspired this young guy whose name was Mamugna. Don't worry, he changes his name later. Anyways, he concocted this brilliant scheme, and he went abroad for a while, and he was a con artist basically, but his con was basically focused around alchemy, right? And when he went abroad and made a bunch of money on these alchemy scams, and when he came back, he bought this like really extravagant palace in this town called Brescia, which was near Venice, right? And he went to great lengths to ornately decorate this palace. He wore the finest robes, always had gold coins in his hands that he was just kind of tapping together, rubbing together. And eventually, people around Brescia were like, who is this guy and how did he come up with all this wealth?
Yeah.
And word spread that he was this great alchemist, right? That discovered that he could turn anything into gold, right? Well, this caught the ears of the Venetian noblemen, and they went to go see this gentleman, who by this time had changed his name to Bragadino. And Bragadino invited them into his palace and actually showed them how he was able to take, just a bit of what seemed like, I guess it was some kind of dust or whatever, and I'm sorry, it was like some kind of cheap, worthless minerals, and he was able to turn them into gold dust, right in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And this fascinated the Venetian noblemen. Little did they know that he was pulling a sleight of hand trick, kind of like Houdini.
Yeah.
But in any case, they took this whole scam hook, line, and sinker, right? And they offered Bragadino a place to live extravagantly in Venice if he would show them his alchemy skills, right? And so he took this whole offer up and lived very lavishly in Venice for quite some time, and didn't really make an attempt to show anybody his alchemy skills, so to speak.
No.
But nobody cared for a while. And then after some time, people were like, "Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is this guy like legit?"
Yeah.
Right?
Let's check the Carfax on this guy.
Yeah, exactly. And so after a while, the noblemen were like, "So, Bragadino,
Yeah.
let's get this gold happening, man."
Yeah. Let's get some gold.
Yeah. And Bragadino was like, "Well, don't worry. I put the elixir or whatever I made. I deposited it in the city's mint, and then if you leave it in there, the amount of gold, it'll double if you leave it in there for a year. But if you leave it in there for 7 years, it'll multiply 30 times over."
No.
Right? And so most of the senators were like, "All right, cool. Just chill out here for 7 years. We'll keep funding your lifestyle through tax-paying dollars."
Yeah.
And but other senators and obviously the public at large were like, "No, we're not having any of this. You need to produce this gold now. Right now." And the demand became so great that Bragadino said, "You know what? I'm leaving this city.
Yeah.
Venice is too impatient. You guys don't deserve my gold making abilities." And so he left, and he was taken in by this by the Duke of Bavaria, who had fallen onto some considerable debt.
That like in the judgment it says, we life is unpleasant, so we kind of want the antithesis of that. We want things to come fast. When in reality, I think things work more over time and very slowly instead of very quickly. So I think it works on that level. On the second level, the way it works is people are drawn to people who give us pleasant news or who kind of give us pleasure. So someone who comes by and says, "Hey, I can get you guys gold fairly soon," is going to be someone who's kind of popular and liked among people. So I guess the law works in on that level, where I guess on the defensive level, it's good to know that we have a tendency to want things quickly and to kind of fight against that. But on another level, you can also become very popular and famous by encouraging people that you can bring them something quick. So yeah, I kind of feel like that story kind of illustrates that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Robert Greene lists 4 common fantasies associated with this play into people's fantasies and their corresponding realities. And one of them they lists is what you were touching on. The fantasy is a sudden transformation will bring a total change in one's fortunes, bypassing work, luck, self-sacrifice, and a lot of patience.
Yeah.
The reality is a lot different, though. Change is slow and gradual. It requires hard work and a bit of luck and a fair amount of self-sacrifice and a lot of patience.
Yeah.
That's 100% true. That's it. It makes kind of like these it shows you why these get-rich quick schemes are so appealing to people. They think, "Oh, with minimal work, I can make a lot of money," but it just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think for a lot of people who try to take shortcuts, especially with get-rich quick schemes, or even people who do illegal things to get money, you end up doing a lot of work to pull that off, anyways.
Yeah,
and it also there's a couple things to say with that. I think in general, when you look at natural systems and you look at things that work naturally, like I don't know, if you work out on the farm, you have 3 months to make the harvest. You can't not do anything for 2 and then try to cram everything in 1 month. It's just not going to happen. And if you are able to get, I guess, fruits or whatever else to harvest, it's not going to be efficient. Like, it's not going to be done well. People won't really buy your products. Or you could also look at the process it takes to become great at something. If you want to become a chess master, or if you want to master, math or something, like, okay, or if you want to become, like, if you want to become a great mathematician, you can't do all that just in 1 year. It's something that takes, like, 10 plus years. Or if you want to become great at chess and you think you could just learn in a week, it's not something that's going to happen. Like imagine, there's this one story I heard of someone who had promised, he had just started learning piano, and he had promised a bunch of his friends, in a month I'm gonna have a concert in front of all of you. And he invited all his friends. He did everything, and in the course of that month, he didn't really do anything. And it wasn't until maybe the last week that he tried to do all of that. And so he never canceled anything. He invited all his friends over. His friends all came, and he was there behind the piano, and that's kind of where he broke down and said, "Hey, look, I haven't learned anything, and I can't really do anything for you." That's kind of the microcosm of that, I guess, that rule in real life. Like, it's just, all natural things don't work that way, And also, I think for when you do get things quickly, when you look at kind of people who win the lottery or people who do get money quickly, they, in general, your character doesn't go up the level to match that too. That's why you see a lot of people who, if they do get money really quickly, they go crazy, or they spend all of it, or they're not able to manage their lives well. I think, if you work really hard at something, and you get really good at something, and you do develop an ability to make a lot of money, those years it took and that time it took to work diligently at something kind of builds your character as well. So it's kind of something that works reflexively, where you kind of need that time to really become like a better person if you are going to achieve things, material things, because of that skill that you learn. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. Another fantasy is we can enter a totally new world with different codes and the promise of adventure. The reality is, social realm has hard set codes and boundaries. We understand these limits and know that we have to move within the same familiar circles day in and day out. I think it kind of ties into the last one. Even like social change is a gradual thing. Yeah. Right? It doesn't happen overnight. Absolutely. So you have to, you can't just expect you're going to wake up in a totally different society than when you went to sleep in. Yeah. Right? Those things happen over time. And also, too, this can be used in so many different angles. It can be used in seduction, right? The whole process of seduction is this whole game of like, oh, my life will be so much different with this person, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. That's the honeymoon phase. And then, that is true to an extent. Like, now you have someone in your life, right? But then, after a while, now there's just that person in your life, and whatever, right? That's all it is. Yeah. That's the end of the honeymoon stage, and that's when you get that. It's kind of funny because it's almost like couples want to constantly keep that fantasy alive, so they have to create conditions where they're kind of like, oh, the fantasy's still here. Yeah. Without, but I feel like a mature couple realizes, like, yeah, we can kind of manufacture the fantasy, but we also understand the reality. Absolutely. Someone once told me that once you see your significant other poop, that pretty much that's the end of it. The fantasy is over. That it's just all reality now. Yeah. But you can kind of imitate the fantasy. Absolutely. In your relationship, but also too, I think a lot of cons that promise like a adventurous life, like work from home things. Yeah, it's like the biggest con out there right now. Dude. I mean, there are a lot of legit work from home opportunities, but they're few and far between, and you're probably not going to find them doing a Google search. Yeah, that's not something. Trust me, I've tried. Yeah. It I mean, for situations like that, you kind of have to be,
it comes down to something that's too good to be true. I think
Yeah.
that's something we've talked about in the previous law too, about how all situations that are too good to be true are that they're too good to be true. The person that's offering that to you is appealing to your self interest and nothing else. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I feel like that work from home example is kind of like it fits into that.
Yeah, it does. Because I mean, that gives you so much freedom to do whatever.
That
you
would
know,
be great.
who wouldn't want that?
Yeah,
I was like wanting to get that and just live on a boat. You know.
yeah.
But yeah, that didn't happen.
Absolutely.
All right, so 3, the fantasy. So people can. I'm sorry. The fantasy is people can come together in a mystical union of souls. God, that drives me crazy. The reality is society is fragmented and full of conflict. Well, that's more like it.
Yeah,
It's true. I mean, we can come together and we
Yeah.
should make an attempt to coexist.
yeah,
But we also have to understand that society is comprised of a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
There's, and it shouldn't, but it is.
It
And
is.
to just kind of ignore the conflict and is very it's very naive and quite frankly quite irresponsible.
Yeah,
As much as I'd like to, as much as I'd like to see a world where being white or being black made no difference whatsoever,
mm-hmm.
have to recognize the fact that to some people that is for whatever reason like a big deal.
Yeah,
And you can't be blind to that
absolutely.
because like Rudy, as you can't just go to a KKK meeting, man. It's not gonna go down well,
Yeah,
right?
seriously.
And I can't go to a Black Panther meeting.
Yeah, I don't think.
I can't go there and be like, "Hey guys, what's up?"
Yeah.
It's good to be aware that there are.
You can't just go in there and say, "I don't see color." What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
I thought I was black too.
Yeah. So it's a nice ideal to strive
Yeah.
for, but you can't. But you also have to understand that there are forces that are trying to stir up conflict.
Yeah.
And the example I just gave about, you and I is a ridiculous example, but it is, the thing is that this concept is used a lot like, oh, if we just all belong to this one philosophy, like not whether it's Nazism or communism or anything or any other kind of ism you can think of,
Yeah.
then what you're doing is you're giving up your individuality, right, to belong to a systematic belief system,
Yeah.
and that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And that systematic belief system obviously is going to project the illusion of a mystical union of some kind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're all the same and
Yeah.
we live in this utopia and blah blah blah, but it never pans out that way ever.
Yeah.
There are differences among people. Doesn't mean that we have to hate people for those differences. We just recognize that there's a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely something where the mystical union of souls, it's comforting. It's comforting to people, especially if you're around a lot of conflict a lot. It's something where when you're completely surrounded by the negatives, you want to go to your happy place, and the happy place is, oh, we're all connected here and everything like that. But it is important, and I think that this book kind of points to this too, where it's important to realize what the reality of the situation is, and then to kind of try to bend your will to that, not the world's will to what you want, but you have to bend your will to what reality is. So then just find your place in that. So you go, okay, there's conflict, how am I going to react to it? And then you could react in positive ways to that, but at least just be aware of that and then make your move from there, and in a way too, not, I think something that this book in general points to also is not necessarily making judgments on the stuff that's out there. You know what I mean? Just kind of in a kind of Buddhist Taoist way, kind of just being like water. You know what I mean? Being like, okay, this thing is happening here, and I'm, like the same thing, bending your will to that. So to go, okay, how can I use this thing to achieve my end in any way,
Right. Exactly. And then the Final Fantasy. Wait, that's a game.
Oh yeah. Final Fantasy.
Wow. I didn't even mean to do that. That's funny. Oh wow. Anyway, so
Is that still around?
probably. I don't know. I never played it. It's video games really are my jam, but in any case,
Not your cup.
nah, not really. I do like Tetris though.
Oh, Tetris is fun.
It's a nice relaxing game. The fantasy here is there can be a sudden reversal of the intolerable. I'm sorry. Oh, wait, let me try again. The fantasy is there can be a sudden reversal of the intolerable fact of death. The reality is the dead cannot be brought back, and the past cannot be changed. That is
very sobering.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely true. I mean, I think there is a lot of death denial.
Yeah.
Everyone should look up. You and I have talked about this channel, Wisecrack.
Yeah.
They talk about the philosophy of Darth Vader. It's all about death denial. It goes into way more depth than I could possibly go.
Oh wow, I haven't seen that, and I've seen a lot of their videos.
Check it out. I recommend everyone check that one out. It's really great. But yeah, I mean, I can give you a quick skinny. I mean, the whole concept of Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker was afraid that he was going to lose everyone that he loved, and that fear basically led to him becoming Darth Vader. That fear consumed him, and and even Yoda, talking about Buddhism, gave his philosophy was counter to that, right? It was that don't be sad when people die and turn to the Force. It's Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
But rejoice in it. You know. And that's not to say that we should be happy when our grandparents die or whatever, but it's just to recognize that there does come a time that we all must pass, and there's nothing you can do to change that.
Yeah. So
you can either be upset about it, or you can just recognize that it's their time to go, and that's that. Leave it at that. And I think so many people have a hard time doing that, and I don't want to word this the wrong way, but I feel as though sometimes religion might offer the false promise that people live on forever in some sense, with like the concept of afterlife. Obviously, I have no way of proving whether there is or isn't.
You're not like a heaven expert?
No. Strangely enough, I'm not. I have no way of proving that one way or the other. And I think it's totally fine for people to believe in an afterlife, but I do have a concern about it insofar as sometimes I feel like in the best way, at best, it gives people some kind of hope and it helps them move on, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But at worst, I feel like it can be used to manipulate people too.
I think so.
That's my only concern with that concept.
It's a very difficult thing, I think, dealing with death and things like that. And I mean, and it makes sense that the fantasy is that, there's a reversal here in death. You know what I mean? Like death, the people I love will come back to life, or like that I'll be seeing them again and everything like that. And again, I don't want to. I'm not an expert either on this, so I don't want to make any statements. Kind of just saying, hey, this is the way it is, I guess. But I do believe that a very important aspect of life is to, in a way, kind of face death, right? So to be very aware of your mortality and to kind of be comfortable with it in a way, to like knowing that you're gonna die someday really is a way to live in a way, like you're comfortable with, so you act kind of with a sense of urgency with the things you do, the things that you do, you mean to do, so I feel like it could be a very effective life philosophy, and that's the reason why I actually do think that even though the fantasy and the comforting part of dealing with death is to go, I'll live forever, so it doesn't matter. I'll see everyone I love again, so it doesn't matter. I kind of feel like dealing with death, you're gonna be better off. You're gonna live a more kind of fruitful life if you face death and you don't kind of ignore it, or you don't try to find comforting things around it. It's a very tough thing to deal with. But I feel like it's something that you just have to face head on and I don't know, come to grips with it in whichever way you can. And if the way to do it is kind of through believing in afterlife and all that, then sure, that's fine. But I think there's effective ways to deal with it, and there's ineffective ways to deal with it. So.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, if that works for if believing in afterlife works for someone, that's great.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking as you were speaking, a complete, it can, there could be some negative consequences in just thinking, well, I'll never see them again.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Yeah.
There could be some negative consequences associated with that as well.
Yeah.
So it's not so much the concept, it's how the individual associates with the concept.
Absolutely.
So, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to, I think the thing that both you and I are saying, though, is regardless of what you believe, whether there's an afterlife or not, everyone should face the inevitable fact that the death is coming for us all.
Yeah.
And
you're going to die. The people you love are going to die.
Yeah. And just recognize that and understand it. And then it won't make death such a big deal. Once you just accept that, it's not such a big deal, really.
Yeah.
And anyone can accept that, whether they believe in an afterlife or not, because, it's a simple fact that, if you're an atheist and you just accept, and you're like, well, I'll be dead and that'll be it.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, then moving on.
Yeah.
And if you're, a religious person of some kind, you go, well, I'll die and I'll have an afterlife and that'll be cool.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Yeah.
The response is the same.
Yeah.
It's just the problem that happens is when people is when they use, I think maybe this is what I was trying to get at, is when they use the concept of an afterlife to not let go of somebody that they love. Right?
Yeah.
If that becomes like kind of like a concentration for them to keep to continuously obsess over that person, that does become a problem. But
that's a very, very difficult thing.
Yeah.
That if because I've heard stories of people who have lost loved ones in very horrific ways and things like that. Where, I don't even know how I would deal with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, there's definitely that kind of sensitivity with how people react to situations like that. And it's definitely, I think there's varying. I don't know. I think that there's. I don't know. Yeah. That's kind of why we're stressing how there's not one way to react. I think there's many different ways, but there's also unhealthy ways to react to it.
Yeah.
That's right. Is what you're saying, more or less. Yeah.
That's basically what I'm saying. Yeah. And I think regardless of what one believes, I think we can all agree that the healthiest thing to do is to recognize that this person is gone, and that when your time comes, that you'll be gone, and that's just how it is, and
that's
you can't. There's nothing you could do about it, and it's nothing to be. It's one thing to grieve for the loss of someone. It's quite another to be afraid of death and to be upset that that death is a thing. It's part of nature. It's going to happen, and just so there's got to be an acceptance of that simple fact. And anybody who tries to tell you that you can reverse death or whatever is just lying to you. That they're probably trying to manipulate you.
100%.
I can't think of. Well, I guess there's a couple of cults that would say that. But apart from them, there's not too many people who could legitimately make that claim anyway.
Yeah. Definitely.
But the more important aspect, I believe, in regards to our discussion, is the idea of the past cannot be changed.
Mm-hmm.
What's the old prayer? God, was it God give me the courage to change the things that I can, the wisdom to.
That's the
how's it go?
Is grant me the courage to
change the things I can, to serenity to accept the things I can, and knowledge to know the difference. That's a
serenity prayer. That's like a big
yes.
With addicts and really with anyone, I guess.
Well, and there's an abundant amount of truth in it.
Yeah,
there really is. And,
I think it's a very effective prayer.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
Wow. Because it also puts the onus on you.
It does.
Where you go, there's limits on what I can do, and there's limits on what I can't. So the things I can do, I'm gonna do. The things I can't do, I have to just accept. There's
exactly.
There's nothing I could do about it.
That's the antidote to that, and it's also just the fact that, we've all done things in our past that we're not proud of, but you can either hem and haw over that, or you can just go, you know what, granted, it shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah.
If I go back in time, I'd change it, but I can't. So here we are, moving forward.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very and just I mean, going back to this law, that knowing that difference between the fantasy that we have of the past and of death, and the reality of what the past and death actually are, is very important. And I feel like there's a lot of people who could kind of take advantage of that and manipulate a lot of people, because that's
absolutely,
we have that tendency to go for the fantasy always, because it's more comforting.
What you just brought up there kind of reminded me of something. This can be used about the past as well. I mean, it could be very easy for say blacks in the United States to go, well, what happened to us during slavery times is not right, and we need retribution now.
Mm-hmm.
And they could, I don't know, run around and just have a mass genocide of white people, I guess. Or you could just accept the fact that yes, what happened to African Americans was a horrible thing, but it's over now. Let's come together and not repeat the same mistakes, because the fact of the matter is, every group of people on this planet has either oppressed or been oppressed in some shape or form. And so if we were to go back and get revenge or retribution for every wrongdoing that every group of people has ever done, there wouldn't be anyone left on this planet. It would be an eye for an eye. Exactly.
The world would be blind.
Well, and especially if you're going to attach, really going to attach like that concept on someone who was alive during a completely different time and place. On somebody who just looks like that person. Like, really? Like, that's ridiculous. How can you possibly, think that, a white person walking down the street today is the same, slaver from from the slavery times in the U.S. How can you possibly think that the someone from Iraq is the same as someone from who exiled all the Jews? How can you think that just a regular German is the same thing as a Nazi or it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept. And I think when people can kind of come to terms to the injustices that occur to their specific group of people, and just realize that it was something that happened in the past and let it go, that's better for the entire world to move on, because the last thing we would want to do is to have yet another injustice, right? What good does that do for anybody?
I think it's something as a whole, generationally for all oppressed groups. It's something that it just takes healing, and it takes time, and ultimately, I think for everyone who's been hurt on any level, I think sometimes when you're dealing with the hurt, there's kind of the thoughts you have, and even the actions in some cases, they don't come out rationally. You know what I mean? I don't know if there's really a solution to that. I just think the solution just is it takes time to heal and to kind of come to terms with it and everything. But that whole thing's a process, kind of like the first reality / fantasy that we talked about, which is, I mean, really to achieve anything, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of work, So I think for any and all groups, all oppressed groups, which is really everyone, it takes a lot of time to kind of deal with that healing. But really, I mean, if the work is done, I mean, it would be a great place if kind of everyone was healed of that, you know what I mean, and there weren't any issues. But again, reality doesn't work that way. There's always going to be conflict.
It's a gradual process. Like, it's not like the first, there's that fantasy that we can suddenly all of a sudden be
all the mystical souls together.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen.
All these fantasies kind of tie in together.
Yeah.
It's the simple fact that things take time.
Things take time, and
going to be
divisions,
divisions,
but then there's also going to be. So it's kind of a cyclical thing too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah.
The message is love the people.
Yeah.
What's our reversal?
The reversal for this. So Green talks a lot about how sometimes when you're trying to tap into people's fantasies, it can also turn disastrous. You know what I mean? Because at some point, people do kind of figure out what you're doing, and they tend to, I guess, turn it on you. The way to handle that, he says, is really just to kind of keep it light, and to not promise results, to not promise real kind of, I guess explicit results, upright all the time. Just to kind of give indications of certain things, like, you might experience this or that. And not really give kind of hard and fast time periods to expect those results, or just explicit results period, or else people are gonna more or less turn on you.
Right.
Yeah. So that's more or less what I got from the reversal.
Fair enough.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, man. I
guess we did it. For the 48 Laws of Power podcast, my name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing off. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.
Listen in every Monday as we air new episodes.